And a couple of days ago, Ion Hazzikostas, also known as Watcher, the game director of World of Warcraft, did another in the latest of his live Q&As on the World of Warcraft Twitch, and he answered questions about a lot of things, especially things coming up regarding 7.1.5. And what I want to pick up on are three main points, or three main discussion areas that he talked about. I want to talk about Legendaries, I want to talk about Retribution Paladins a little bit, and a small amount on Havoc Demon Hunters. So the first thing to note is that he has confirmed that patch 7.1.5 will be in January, as I thought it would be. We don't know when in January at all. The reason why we know this now is because he said the next Q&A will take place in the first few weeks of January, round about the time when 7.1.5 goes live. The fact that Ankh-Iraj Remembrance Day is on the 22nd of January, as I noted in my last patch 7.1.5 video, means that you would think quite likely within the first couple of weeks of January rather than the 3rd, because that would push it very close to AQ Remembrance Day. But, you know, it's going to come out before the 22nd of January as far as I can read from that. So I'm going to get Legendaries out of the way first because this is of interest to everyone, and then it's only really one thing about Ret Paladins and one thing about Havoc Demon Hunters he talked about, but it was momentous enough in terms of what he was talking about. So I'll put that at the end because that's of course quite specialist. So of course legendary items have been roundly panned by a lot of players. I'm not saying all, I'm not saying no one likes this system. Of course it's fairly obvious that some people must like the system because, well, some people at Blizzard must like it, otherwise they would never have implemented it. But an awful lot, shall we say, of serious players are not very keen on it at all. It presents a number of problems. First of all, if you do not get Legendaries at all, you're really going to fall behind. They said things like, oh, it's not going to affect the world race and things like that. Maybe it didn't, but it sure as hell affects everyone else. As a guild as a whole, it might not affect them because, again, on balance, if you've got players who are putting in a certain amount of time and doing the content that's needed to get these Legendaries, then the guild as a whole might do okay out of it. But individual players will not. If you've ended up with either no Legendaries because you're just really unlucky, or maybe just one or two, and they've been poor quality Legendaries, you're falling behind people who've been lucky and grabbed themselves the 2 BIS Legendaries. And it makes no difference. You could have someone who's got 5 Legendaries and someone who's got 2, and you think the one who's got 5 really lucky. But if they're 5 Legendaries that are totally useless for the content they're doing, let's say raiding, I'm mostly focused on raiding, and that's what my channel's mostly focused on. And the other person with 2 has got their 2 BIS ones, they don't need anymore. Those are the 2 BIS ones. So it's not been a good system for that. Blizzard do look like they're making some changes. They're certainly, I mean, I only look at a few specs, like Retribution Paladin being the main one, and I can see that though at the moment there are 2 good Legendaries, like really good ones. And that means there are 6 of varying degrees of quality. Now, there's going to be 2 new ones in patch 7.1.5, so there'll be 10 altogether for a particular class spec combination. And I have to say, with Retribution Paladin, there will only be 3 pretty poor ones when the patch goes live. So it's not terrible at all compared to now, where 2 out of 8 are good, compared with then when it will be 7 out of 10 are good. Not bad. But here's what they had to say about some of the things, because some of the things, although it looks like, in terms of the evidence of what's coming out on PTR, they're getting their act together, I think they're still wrong about some of their attitudes towards Legendaries, which doesn't necessarily bode as well as I was hoping. So what they've said is it's okay for not all Legendaries to be the best for every situation. They've said, you know, if you get one Legendary that's really good for AoE, it's okay that that wouldn't be great on single target. That's fine. There's no issue with that at all. But that's not what the problem is. The problem is that you have some Legendaries that are actually useless. Remember, we had situations where people were getting rings and necks especially and not equipping them, even when they had no other Legendaries. That's really bad. That's not a situation where the Legendary effect is just not as good as you were hoping. That's where it's worthless. You've got something without great stats, that's why you haven't equipped it, and the effect is not enough to compensate. You can't allow that to happen. That's what happened. And the next bit sort of it made me chuckle. I had to laugh a little bit. So I need to read this out. I'll have to read this out. It may have been a mistake to make legendary items that always increase throughput. No. In fact, those who had fewer items that increase throughput had a tougher time of it. So again, I'll come back to my example, Retribution Paladin. This may well apply to others as well, of course. We had 2 out of, in fact, what we have right now in live, out of the 8 legendaries, 2 of them increased throughput. 2 out of 8. That's really bad, because if you don't get at least one of those 2, I'm fortunate I have one of those 2 good ones. Some people have both of them. That makes a massive difference. It makes a huge difference. So you actually, it's not a mistake to have made too many that increase throughput. It's a mistake not to have made all of them, or at least not make all of them useful. And then the next thing they said, items like Cephas, which unfortunately I got this week. I've been waiting quite a long time for my 3rd legendary. You know, I actually waited quite a long time for my first. I was one of the last in my guild at the time. It's a different guild now. To get the first legendary. The second one came reasonably shortly after it. I wasn't actually waiting a long time. I think it was a couple of weeks. And then it's been quite a long wait for this one as well. And then I got Cephas' Secret. This is what I was met with. My heart sank. You know, because I've been opening up, I got it from an emissary cache, and I've been opening up my emissary cache every day, of course, with that anticipation. It's like, even though you know it's got the lowest chance to, you know, raids have got the best chance, but you don't think about it when doing bosses. And my heart just sank when I saw that. Worthless, utterly worthless. But I will talk about that in a moment. And what he says is, items like Cephas would have been very exciting in the past, but it's no longer exciting because of the alternatives you have, such as the Fire Mage Bracers. Now, here's the thing. I know that Blizzard is based in California. And I also know, or at least I'm led to believe, that California has legalized a great many mind-altering drugs for recreational use. But do they really have to be taking them when they do the Q&As? Cephas would have been very exciting in the past. No, it wouldn't. When would it be exciting? I'd have never been excited by that effect. Let's think about the effect on Cephas' Secret. And this is only one we're picking on, okay? But as he's brought it up, so you only get an effect at all if you can put a movement impairment, and when it comes to patch 7.1.5, like an interrupt, on your target. So the movement impairment, first of all, that's what it was when it was first brought out. Not everyone has them, and some people have them on a shorter or longer cooldown than others. So let's say in a raid situation. So you can't use it on bosses, of course, because they're immune to those effects. Some bosses have ads, but you can't always use it on the ads, because some people need you not to slow the ads. You know, if the ads had been moved somewhere, they're not going to thank you for slowing them. That's not helping. So it's very difficult to impossible to make use of it in a raid. Then when it comes to the interrupt, okay, when the interrupt effect is added, that's better. But again, come into a raid, and yes, raids are not the be-all and end-all of everything. But not everything does something that needs interrupting. And when it does, you're in as part of an interrupt rotation as well. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to, or when the interrupting has to happen, does not necessarily coincide with when you want it most to happen. Let's say when you've got DPS cooldowns going. Cephas is a mind-numbingly annoying legendary to have. It's even more annoying than the ring from Warlords of Draenor. That was annoying enough because of the shared aspect of it, one person triggering everyone's. That was bad enough. This was horrendous. So, no, I don't know what he's been smoking, but he needs to lay off it, seriously. And if you were choosing between Cephas, Pridaz, which is the neck, the absorb neck, which I would actually prefer that, even though that's got no throughput potential. But at least it's got some absorb shield on it. And especially it's been made a little bit better in patch 7.1.5. And some of the situational legendary items, it would be a more even choice. No, you'd just be choosing between. In fact, if all of the legendaries were of the quality of those two, people would choose not to wear them unless the stats were good. You've got to remember, a legendary like Cephas is like for everyone. So for me, it happens to have decent stats. Okay, if it was one of 2 legendaries that I had, I would wear it for the stats, and with the potential that maybe every now and then I get a DPS increase out of it or some use out of it. I know I wouldn't very often, but the stats are decent. It's an upgrade on what I currently have in my other ring slot. But for some people, it's bound to the stats are bound to be not so good. In which case they just won't wear it because it's not good, and the effect isn't good enough to compensate for any loss of those stats. So I think they're being a bit delusional on that one. I have to say they're being very delusional. So it says that the team will continue to tune legendary items so you don't feel that you aren't viable without one. Sorry, you aren't viable without one, and the only way to do that is to do what, to be fair, they appear to be doing. Or looking at the legendaries of the classes and specs I'm familiar with, which is to make the shit ones better. Because if more of the legendaries are useful, and I'm sorry, if it's for DPS, useful means being able to do more damage. That's what useful means. Now, granted, I mean, I have 3 legendaries now because I have Cephas, but forget about that. In fact, I'm not even, is it in my bags? It's probably still in my bags. It wouldn't have surprised me if I'd have put it in my bank. But the previous 2 I had were a good ring, a ring that's actually one of my BIS ones, and bracers that give me like a cheat death. Now, even though the bracers have not been that useful to me, they haven't really helped me, even on progress. In fact, they're sometimes a bit of an annoyance because I have to die multiple times. When a wipe is called, I have to sort of get myself killed several times to actually die. Because usually I don't trigger this thing. I don't usually deliberately trigger it in combat because although I could use it as a DPS increase because of another effect on it, it's reducing my health to 1. Healers will thank me for doing that. And occasionally, yeah, sure, I trigger it accidentally. And it's a nice little safety net. So it's not a bad one. I was not disappointed to get it. But if I had a choice of 2 legendaries that were giving me actual throughput, I would be using those every time, because that's what I need. I need, what ultimately is being asked of me as a DPS is to do lots of damage on priority targets, and that's all there is to it. That's my job. They did also say that with legendaries, they will increase the drop rate over time, so people who are playing or starting to play later on in the expansion will have a better chance of getting them, or will get them more quickly for doing the same content than people who started the game. I mean, obviously they've got to do things like that. I mean, this is where legendary items fail again, really. It was always the case in Warlords of Draenor and Mists of Pandaria, because you had the legendary quest line that went through the expansion, that people who joined late would not only have to gear up for raids, that's always been an issue, but also have to go through their legendary quest line. But there are always catch-up mechanics to allow you to do that. And you sort of knew, even in the last tier, that it would take you so many... You could work it out, on average, it would take you so many weeks to get that. And that held you back a bit. That certainly held you back. I mean, this is even worse, that, people joining later on the expansion, if they haven't got those legendaries. Because even with a better chance to drop, even if you've got 1 a week, let's say, they might not be the BIS ones even then, even though they seem to be making them a bit better. But then maybe towards the end, they will have tuned them so that there aren't always standout ones. I mean, we'll come back to their comment, a legendary that's good for AoE is not necessarily good for single target. If that had been their approach from the start, I don't think we'd be having as many issues. I think we would still have issues, but not as many. But that's not the situation. It's not that it's a case of some are for AoE and some are for single target. It's like, no, it's some are for DPS and some are not. Or some are good for healing and some are not. Or some are good for tanking and some are not. And it's that. It's like some are good for the role you are going to take part in and some are not. And the some that are not, if I get them, I'm just wasting time. But anyway, that's it for legendaries. So on to a couple of other things now. Now, Havoc Demon Hunters, first of all. One of the main things about Havoc Demon Hunter, one of the defining things which polarizes opinion quite strongly, is the momentum talent. So it's a very difficult one to argue against. I've never sort of really felt inclined to argue against momentum being a thing, because it fits the class. It fits the idea of a demon hunter flitting about, all right, constantly on the move, never quite, the idea that they're never going to stand toe-to-toe with you, at least Havoc Demon Hunters. they're disappearing out of your eye line all the time, appearing somewhere else, striking from there, and so on. It is the only time I can really use the term class fantasy without wanting to strangle Blizzard developers, because it fits the class fantasy. However, that doesn't stop people disliking it. There are a lot of people who will really want to play a Demon Hunter, do not like the momentum playstyle. Now, if it were as simple as that, I think we'd just go back to what I originally said about it. Was I'm not necessarily hugely keen on it myself, but I'm not going to criticise it because it absolutely suits the fantasy, the class fantasy of the Havoc Demon Hunter. But what they've been doing across the board is noting, as I say, about talents. They've been noting that some talents are just dead talents and nobody's ever taken them. That's obviously bad. And also, some talents are just being taken all the time because they're just universally good. They're used in every situation. This is a bit of a problem with momentum because momentum is just used a lot. You can actually, with momentum, imagine situations where other talents could be used, but you always come back to they're in some situations maybe as good as momentum, but momentum's always just good. Almost always just good. So what they've done is they've said they're going to change a few things so that if people really don't want to play the momentum playstyle, that they won't have to without sacrificing output or anything like that. They're not necessarily going to do it by nerfing momentum itself, by the sounds of it, simply other abilities. I mean, they mentioned Fell Barrage as one example. So we'll see what comes with that. I get the impression come 7.1.5, so we'll keep an eye on the PTR. But it does look like if you really don't like the momentum playstyle and you sort of feel forced into it, that there may be alternative options when the patch goes live. Then finally, Retribution Paladins. Now, obviously, we've already looked at some of the effects changing in 7.1.5. Now, one thing that is not changing in that patch, or it didn't sound like it was, but will be at some point, 10 months after I first brought out the first video completely slating the concept of Greater Blessings, in particular the Greater Blessing of Might, Blizzard have finally acknowledged, Ion Hazzikostas, game director, has finally come out and said it's a failed design. It's a completely failed design. And it is. It was never going to work from the start. It's horrendous. No one likes it. And they're actually acknowledging this. They're saying the issue is that if this thing is just going to buff people's damage, it's like, do you have the Retribution Paladin be able to do the same damage as everyone else? If the answer is no, then the Retribution Paladin player doesn't feel good. If the answer is yes, then you're just making them too good. So their solution was to make the Blessing of Might damage count for the Paladin. But as we all know, it sort of depends on what you're using for that. Logs tend now to work reasonably well with it. They're reasonably accurate with that. But what if you don't use logs? What if you use SCADA? SCADA's not at all accurate with it. Details, I gather, is supposed to be a bit better, but even then I don't think it always is. I think it's supposed to be the better of them. And yeah, I know we shouldn't look at damage meters, but a lot of people do. Sorry, a lot do. So that didn't work. And also the other thing Blizzard said, and they're dead right about this, made this point myself, is the problem is that you're putting something on someone, people see it as a buff. But if the damage isn't counting for them, then they resent that. Because it's not a buff for them, it's just an annoying thing on their buff bar. And the Paladin doesn't feel great about it either. And I certainly don't feel good about it. I mean, every fight, I'm there working out who to put my Greater Blessing of Might on. And my Greater Blessing of Might is actually cursed. The people I put it on tend to die. I certainly don't know who to put it on. I don't know even one person on any given fight who will put it on, and I know that they're going to become one of the top DPS, or even one of the most top effective DPS. It doesn't have to be the top. Like on Il'gynoth, I'll try and put it on the 3 that I think are going to do the most damage on the heart, although that's probably less important now because we easily beat the timer. But certainly when you're progressing on it and time's tight and that's the most effective DPS. But even doing that, I just don't know, because people are not that consistent. Because sometimes how much DPS someone does might depend on lucky procs with their own legendaries or trinkets or something. It's maddening. Absolutely maddening. And the fact you can't put it on in combat, yeah, okay, it saves us having to swap it around during combat, which was going to be a massive pain in the ass. But it also means if someone's pulling, you get into combat, it's like, oh, I need to change this Blessing of Might. Or even just put one on. You're not getting the chance to because everyone's getting you in combat really quickly. It's a nightmare. So I'm quite pleased that they've actually come out and said it. I am really pleased that because what they easily could have done was just to say, it's not working quite as we'd hoped. We're going to tune it. Because like, what I would like, now that they've said this, I would quite like them to just get rid of it, buff us back up, buff our damage back up to be around about where everyone else is, and just forget it. That would be better than what we have now. Unfortunately, they're not going to do that because what they've said is they want to come up with a better design, but they don't have one yet. So they don't have any ideas. So I'm probably going to take from that this is not going to be something that changes in 7.1.5. This is probably going to be 7.2. So we are lumbered with it for the short term or even medium term, as far as I can tell. But I have to say, given that they're going to do that, they easily could have come around and said, oh, it's not working as we expected, but, we're going to refine it. We're not quite sure yet, to try and save face. But they haven't. They've come straight out, and fair play. I'm not going to criticise Ian for this one. They've just said it's a failed design. And I could harp on about the fact that we've been saying this for the best part of a year, that it was never going to work. We could come out with the biggest I told you so ever. But, I don't feel the need to do that now because they haven't tried to sugarcoat this in any way. Not like the Legendaries. The Legendaries, I'm going to have a bash because they've tried to sugarcoat all that and put the blame on us. For this one, they've just come straight out and goes, what, it's not worked. It's just, it needs bidding. It's just that I wish they would do that. I wish they would just go, cut it out. Leave us with Wisdom and Kings. We can put those. I mean, they're equally useless. Actually, no, they're not. I'll probably put Wisdom on people. And just buff our damage back up to normal. No one's going to feel that you're going to bring extra rets for the Greater Blessing of Wisdom. It's worthless. It's largely worthless. At the same time, you might as well keep it and put it on people. You never know. But there we go. So those are my thoughts on what I thought for me were the three main things that came out of that Q&A. He did talk about other classes as well. But there's other classes and specs I know much less about, so I don't really want to talk about those. I'm sure there are other people who are talking about those if you're interested in those. Hope you found it interesting between my little rants. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. And until next time, I'll see you later.